Putin made three miscalculations at the start of the war. The first one was the strength of Ukrainian nationalism. I'll come back to that in terms of Crimea after I give this answer. The second one was the strength of the Russian army. And the third one was the notion that there was a decadent West.
I'd like to start, first of all, by asking you about these words by President Zelensky earlier on today, where he said essentially that the war with Russia started with Crimea being taken, and so it can only end with it being liberated. What do you make of that? Is that much of a shift?
I don't think so. There's always been this notion, certainly from the Ukrainian side, that land for peace is not on the agenda. Neither should it be for the West, because it would reward aggression. Essentially, it would mean that Russia had broken all those agreements from the Budapest Memorandum 1994, the Helsinki Final Agreement in 1975, which set up the OSCE, that no borders should be changed in Europe by force, and finally the Minsk II Agreement. So he's right. Ukraine needs to recover its sovereign identity. How that's going to be done is still a big question, but they're certainly on the right track now with the financial, humanitarian, diplomatic, logistical and military support from the West.
Are they on the right track, do you think, for a goal such as that? Not just taking back bits of the Donbass, which have gone recently under Russian control, but Crimea, which was taken all the way back in, 2014?
They are until they're not. And I know that sounds sort of a rhetorical reply, but at the end of the day, because Ukraine is a democracy and is subject to what the population ultimately say, they can take everything or they can take as little as they want, as long as the population decide that. Now, the amount of the population in percentage terms, which still has no truck with trading land for peace, is incredibly high. It's somewhere around 89%, the last I looked. And again, in an authoritarian sense, that Putin can also take as little or as much as he wants, because he controls that most essential thing. Napoleon used to say that he'd rather control a newspaper than a division of troops, and Putin controls the press. So if Putin goes to a minimalist objective that he might settle for bits of the Donbass, which he said are independent at the moment, that's also a way out for Putin. But we shouldn't allow Putin an off-ramp at all at the moment, in my opinion.
But do you think that the international community might, to some extent, on that front? We know that they were pretty much happy to turn a almost blind eye to this back in 2014 when Russia took control of the Crimea. So if Ukraine makes incredible progress in parts of the Donbass and elsewhere where Russia's made gains in Kherson and Melitopol and places like that, but not Crimea, do you think there will be pressure on Zelensky from the international community to say, why don't we sort of vote for peace now?
Well, I think ultimately Putin made three miscalculations at the start of the war. The first one was the strength of Ukrainian nationalism. I'll come back to that in terms of Crimea after I give this answer. The second one was the strength of the Russian army. And the third one was the notion that there was a decadent West. Now, Crimea is crucial because Crimea really in 2014 sort of played to that notion that Putin had sort of gathered in and raised up Russian lands. Now, that was more virtual and propagandistic than real, because to gain Crimea of 2 million people, he really lost Ukraine of 40 million people. And that's been his real problem since, that Ukraine wishes to be in the orbit of the West. Now, the real crucial thing yesterday was the attack, it seems to me, on the Saki air base, because that has frightened the life out of the Russians, because suddenly Ukraine possesses the offensive power to hit anywhere they want in Crimea, and that may include the Kerch Bridge and the Kerch Straits, which would effectively isolate Ukraine, and also brings in the naval port of Sevastopol into range. So it's a real dilemma for Russia, and if they have to make key decisions there about getting major people out. And of course, we've seen a lot of the population already fleeing across the Kerch Bridge. That can't be something which you can propagandize when you get home. Those strikes have happened, and you can't gain your way out of it, even though they might say that it was an ammunition accident, whilst at the same time they're saying red lines have been crossed.
But if Ukraine, up until this point, has relied largely on international lethal aid to defend itself, and the international community has said, well, we only want to provide defensive lethal aid, we don't want to give them the capability to necessarily attack Russia, how much is that going to hold them back from targets like regaining Crimea?
Well, let's be clear what the key constituency is here. Really, it's the Americans. Now, the Americans so far have given 9.8 billion in military aid, and if you look at the Ukraine defense budget the previous year prior to war, it was 5.9 billion. Now, the Americans have already voted 40 billion of aid, so there's still a lot in the pipeline for the Americans to give them. But like everything, it's a case of domestic politics, alliance politics, and politics in Russia, and the politics of America with the midterm elections, with inflation and all those things that go with the southern border, could actually alter the calculus if the Republicans were to gain power in the houses, and you had a sort of Trumpian rump which was ahead of the Reagan Republicans.
Yeah.
So all things can always happen. At the moment, the support of Ukraine is steadfast, and I hope that continues.
Also in the UK, with all that's happening here politically.
Yeah, but I don't see any sort of cigarette paper between the notion of Boris Johnson supporting them and whoever is the next prime minister of this country. I think the policy will remain consistent, that Ukraine gets all the support we can have. And indeed, we've seen that in terms of the number of nations who are coming across to the UK to help train the Ukrainians. We've got now Canadians, we've got Swedes and Norwegians alongside the British training Ukrainian troops in the UK.
Thanks for joining us in the briefing room, Major General Chip Chapman, former head of counter-terrorism and UK operations in the Ministry of Defence.